This is an exciting time in Scotland's story, and understanding our past will help us determine our future. And when Scotland's voice is heard, it charts the way forward. This is Scotland Speaks with Salmond.
Hello and welcome to Scotland Speaks with Salmond, and back to our studios in Glasgow after a few weeks on the road. Today our eyes turn to Europe, but not to Brussels, but instead to Geneva and the headquarters of another European Economic Alliance, EFTA, the European Free Trade Association, the four-country agreement comprising Norway, Iceland, Liechtenstein and Switzerland. Now, back in the late 1980s, the Scottish National Party alighted upon a new perspective on independence, which helped transform their prospects. Traditionally hostile to the European Union and having campaigned against in the 1975 referendum, the party, under the influence of the late Winnie Ewing and Professor Neil MacCormick, swung dramatically to a pro-Europe position. A third key figure in that transformation was former Labour MP Jim Sillars, who won a dramatic by-election for the SNP in Govan in 1988 on the twin platforms of opposition to the poll tax and independence in Europe. Today we speak again to that same Jim Sillars, who now argues that the European Free Trade Association would indeed be a better anchorage for a Scotland preparing for independence. Then for an academic view, we speak to Craig Berry of Commonweal, and for some practical country experience of life in EFTA, we turn to Icelandic MP and President of the West Nordic Council, Bryndis Haraldsdóttir. But first, to Alex, who's with his old comrade, Jim Sillars.
I'm now delighted to be joined by Jim Sillars, the former Scottish National Party and Labour and Scottish Labour Member of Parliament, and one of the earliest exponents of the principle of Scotland in Europe. Jim Sillars, welcome to Scotland Speaks with Salmond.
Well, thanks very much.
Now, Jim, if we go right back to the 1970s into the 1980s, you were one of a group of people who were arguing for an independent Scotland within the context of Europe, in the context of the European Union. It would be right to say yourself, Winnie Ewing, myself, I suppose, were part of a group who were trying to transform the attitude of Scottish nationalism towards the European perspective.
Yeah, well, actually, after the 1975 referendum, which said that we would remain members of what was then the common market and went on to become the EU, I thought, that's it. You know, I couldn't envisage us ever coming out. And so it struck me, even before the 75 referendum, in a speech I made in the House of Commons, actually said, if we're going to go into the common market, I saw no logic in a Scottish position going to London to be watered down on its way to Brussels. And it seemed to me the logic from Scotland was to go straight to Brussels as a member state. And you bear in mind, at that time, the common market was only made up of 12 member states. We would have made it 13. And all those 12 states had very significant national vetoes. They could apply to policy that regarded against the national interest. That was a very, very important power, sovereign power, that was exercised then. The problem that developed was as the European common market became the European community and then the European Union, it expanded in its membership. And of course, to make it work, the veto has to be abolished in a whole range of areas. And the ultimate came in the Lisbon Treaty. There's a remarkable long list of what were previously national vetoes now went into qualified majority voting, which is a rather complex way of reaching decisions in the EU on contentious matters. And in that,
so there's been changes in the way that the European Union conducts itself. But can we start with the changes in Scottish politics? Because your victory in the Govan by-election of 1988, it was transformational in terms of modern Scottish politics. And that was fought on a twin platform, as I remember it, as I was there with you, of no poll tax. We're not paying the poll tax, a great social issue in Scotland at the time, but also on the perspective of an independent Scotland within Europe. Were they equally important in terms of adding a new dimension to Scottish nationalism?
oh, it's very interesting, actually. In 1975, the day after the referendum, I produced a memorandum about Scotland going into the European Union. And I held a press conference. And none of the journalists could understand what I was talking about. I then flew down from Glasgow to London, and all of my colleagues in the Labour Party shook their head, just utterly bemused by this idea. So it appeared to die. But I kept it going, and when we formed the SLP, that became a platform for the SLP. And when I joined the Scottish National Party, people like yourself, for example, and Kenny McCaskill, you joined the idea of independence in Europe. And you and me and others lobbied within the party, and we finally managed to get independence in Europe to become party policy. So it was a long way from 75 to around about 1986 or 7, I think it was, before it became the policy. And of course, once it became the policy, and with the Govan by-election, where we were able to articulate the idea, independence in Europe became part of the normal mainstream agenda in Scotland, which is a remarkable difference from 1975. We now have the same problem in reverse, where the SNP, of which I am still a member, is thrilled to the idea of Scotland being a member of the European Union, as if the European Union has not changed since 1988 or 87. And I believe that there's a better option for an independent Scotland than being one of 27 members in the European Union over just about every policy that matters to any state.
So you advocate now, given the context of post-Brexit, or post a decision in a referendum by the United Kingdom to withdraw from the European Union, you argue that Scotland should be looking to the European Free Trade Association, EFTA. And what would you say were the pros and cons, if there are any, of EFTA membership compared to European Union membership?
Well, if those who will prepare the brief for negotiations when we win an independent referendum have to take account of the realities of this life. And what matters in international relations is geography, spheres of influence, and state interests. And within that equation, the size of the country and where it's located is extremely important in taking a realistic position and a realistic understanding of where you are. And for an independent Scotland, we are in the United States sphere of influence. We're in England's sphere of influence, have been for hundreds of years, and are going to remain in England's sphere of influence, because the moment Scotland becomes independent, then there's a reversal of 1707, where England doesn't control that northern part of the island of Great Britain any longer. we're in NATO's sphere of influence, and we're in Europe's sphere of influence. Now, we're only 5 million. You may recall Willie Slavin used to get great cheers at the conference when he stood up, and I think he quoted the O'Donnell from Ireland, that no man can set the bounds of a nation. Wonderful rhetoric, but actually not true. And if you're a small country, in that matrix I've just explained, you have to be very, very careful what you do with your sovereignty, because part of your sovereignty has got to be sacrificed or transferred in order to get your access to a wider community than just simply your home market. Now, let's assume we are independent today. We've got full sovereignty. What do you do with that sovereignty? If you join the United Nations, which we would do, there's a degree of trading away that sovereignty because you're subject to the Security Council resolutions and the Charter of the United Nations. If you join the World Trade Organization, which any sensible person would want to do, then you have to accept rules that you partly make, but are made in conjunction with other people. So you then say, right, we're European, we want access to markets. There's the English market, which is important to us, and there's the single market of the European Union plus the EFTA states. And what matters isn't so much membership of EFTA, it's where membership of EFTA takes us into the European Economic Area Treaty signed in 1973 between 3 EFTA states, Norway, Iceland, and Liechtenstein, and the European Union. Now, the difference between the EEA and membership of the EU is that under the EEA, you don't trade in as much sovereignty over fairly vital areas, such as agriculture, fisheries, which are both important to us, energy, which is extremely important to us, foreign affairs, home affairs, and crime. So if you join EFTA as the avenue to the EEA, you're only sacrificing a degree of your sovereignty. Whereas if you join the European Union, you're actually transferring your sovereignty to a single organization in Brussels. Now you've got a vote, no question about that, but Scotland would only represent 1.3% of the European Union. And I think our majority qualified voting would be the same as Ireland's and Denmark. I think it's round about 7 out of 352 votes in total when you come to qualified majority voting. So in order to retain sovereignty over critical domestic areas, and in order to retain sovereignty over foreign policy and trade policy, strikes me that EFTA and a member of the EEA is the most sensible position for Scotland to take.
In your estimation, Jim Sillars, how big a blunder was it by the SNP government in Scotland after the Brexit referendum to put such a stress on trying to reverse Brexit as opposed to improving Scotland's negotiating position within Brexit, a la Northern Ireland's now membership of the single market? Do you think the emphasis on trying to reverse the Brexit decision, which proved impossible, should have been rather an emphasis on trying to improve Scotland's negotiating position, which might have been possible?
Well, I'll be perfectly frank. I think it's a decision of the ignorant. I don't think they have studied what would be required to apply for the European Union. And they have produced a whole range of canards about membership of EFTA and the EEA. They seem to think that it's a simple matter. You're sort of one independence on the Thursday and you apply for EU membership on the Friday and you'll be in there on Monday morning. It doesn't work that way. You have to become a candidate member at first. You have to comply with a number of rules that the European Union apply to you as a candidate member. Now, it could be argued, well, we already have been a member, so being a candidate shouldn't be too difficult. To some extent, there's a degree of truth in that. But the European Union has moved on since Brexit. And we're in an entirely different position because England, one of our biggest trading partners, is not in the EU and is not going back into the EU. So we've got a rather complex situation here. And it's probably going to take about 10 years. And there would also be a commitment in principle. And, in the negotiations, they might want more than principle on the question of joining the euro. Now, as Greece found out, and Spain and Portugal, when you join up to the Eurozone, you have surrendered key part of your sovereignty. You don't control your currency any longer. And what would happen if our negotiators were told, look, you're a new country. You don't have any financial record in the international community. We think you should join the euro straight away once you comply with the reasons that you have to pass to join the euro. Whereas you go to EFTA and you apply for the EEA, you're not involved in the single currency. And EFTA, my understanding is, and the Scottish Sovereignty Research Group have done a great deal of work with EFTA, including going to meetings with EFTA, attending conferences with EFTA just last 2 or 3 weeks ago. And it's pretty certain that we could quickly get membership of EFTA because small Scotland, oil, fishing, agriculture, major parts of our economy is complementary to how EFTA is framed at the present time. So it seems to me all the logic points in the negotiating position, let's go to EFTA and with the membership of EFTA, get into the European Economic Area, into the single market, and that's all.
But isn't that one of the issues, Jim Sillars, that yes, membership of EFTA is a very speedy process in international terms, a matter of weeks, months at most, whereas the membership of the European Economic Area through EFTA is not such a speedy process. There are advantages, and it would be a Commission initiative as opposed to a Council of Ministers decision, but nonetheless, that would still take a bit of time, would it not, for transition into the European Economic Area?
Yes, we would be applying for membership not as a new state on our own. We'd be applying for membership as a member of the European Free Trade Association bloc, and we would be able to borrow whatever influence and power they have in the negotiations. And, I don't think our relationship with either the EU or EFTA and the EEA has been properly understood and studied. I mean, we would have to create our own institutions so that they were compatible with the institutions of the EFTA members and the institutional relationship between the EFTA members and the European Union members inside the framework of the economic area. So there's a lot of work to be done. But the fact is, it's going to be much easier going down the EFTA road as a member of the EFTA bloc, because EFTA's relationship with the European Union is a very long-standing one. Since 1993, it is not an antagonistic relationship. It's a highly cooperative relationship. EFTA states don't have a vote on European Union rules, and very often might have to comply, even if you possibly don't like it. But here's the critical factor. There's no real veto inside the European Union. But if you're a member of the EFTA state in the EEA and you come up against something that you regard as fundamental to your national interest, you can say, sorry, we're not going to have it. And I'll give you an example. The European Union wanted to extend its competence to energy in the North Sea, which means Norwegian oil and gas. And what the Norwegians said very politely, but very firmly, this is not within the competences of the European Economic Area Treaty, therefore it will not happen. So as a small country, as a member of EFTA, you don't expend your political capital every time. But when it comes to a fundamental state interest, that's when an EFTA state can say, sorry, we don't agree and we will not comply.
Jim Sillars, closing the interview, I want to put two scenarios to you. The first one is this, and let's do something that not many Scots politicians manage to do. Let's look at things from the other side's point of view. Rather interestingly, after the Brexit vote, when the UK was casting about for what relationships it was going to have, it was made very clear by EFTA politicians, and particularly by Norwegian politicians, that politely, but as firmly as they could, that they wouldn't have seen a United Kingdom membership of EFTA as a particularly attractive prospect. Now, can you understand why it might be within EFTA that they'd be leery about United Kingdom membership, but quite attracted to the idea of Scottish membership?
Actually, the history is the United Kingdom set up EFTA when the EEC was established by Germany and France as a counterbalance to the EEC. And then when the United Kingdom reckoned that their national interest is better than the EU, they left EFTA. So that left EFTA a small state organisation, not one dominated by a very big state. So from EFTA's point of view, us going in presents not only no threat, we are compatible with their type of organisation, their view of the world, and their size. So we don't hold any threat to EFTA. We would actually strengthen EFTA's position in the international community because EFTA does its own international trade deals. It does it as an EFTA bloc, and it's got over 30 free trade agreements worldwide, including, by the way, with the United Kingdom after Brexit.
And my final scenario is this, Jim, that we as politicians, for most of our political lives, have tried to imagine a position where the Scottish First Minister is negotiating with the rest of the UK Prime Minister in terms of the exact terms of Scottish independence. What are the advantages that a Scottish First Minister would have in that scenario? Let's say the negotiations were at Hexham or somewhere. What would be the advantages that a Scottish First Minister would have of having a fairly certain route for Scotland's trading position as opposed to a route which would be dependent on the future decisions of the Council of Ministers?
Yeah, this is very important. If you're going in to negotiate, and we have to do with England, it's our biggest market, and there is what Margaret MacDonald always said, there's going to be, the social union is going to continue. People still from Scotland want to go to London, want to support Manchester United and Liverpool, and English people will want to come north of the border because their granny's up here and all the rest of it. So, the social union will in fact continue. It's when you come to the nitty-gritty of the actual relationship, the trading and economic relationship with England, that no work has been done, but it has to be done. You have to sit down and say, look, we're 5 million, they're 60 million. what is our weaknesses and what is our strengths in that negotiation? What is our red lines? What is their strengths and what is their weaknesses? I mean, what do we matter to them and what do they matter to us? That you have to go in right into that right at the beginning. And if someone says to me, and they're on the other side of the negotiating tables, you ain't got nowhere to go, pal. You've got to come with a relationship with us that's binary. And I say, well, that would be the case maybe a fortnight ago, but actually our application to EFTA, which has got a free trade association agreement with you, rather alters that power balance between you and me. So let's sit down and talk sensibly. I think it really will matter. It gives us a degree of leverage that we wouldn't have if we were not a member of EFTA. And it gives us a position we wouldn't have if we were not a member of EFTA. I mean, if we're 5 million, let's assume we're not going to the EU, we're not going to EFTA, just us in England. It's 5 million negotiating with 60 million, and the 60 million for a long time is going to be our biggest foreign market. You say to yourself, how do I strengthen my position? Even if you didn't agree about going to EFTA, that's the logic that takes you there, because it strengthens your hand in negotiations with our friends south of the border.
Well, let's hope, Jim Sillars, that you and I both live to see the day where that information will come into useful to whoever the Scottish First Minister is. Jim Sillars, thank you so much for joining me on Scotland Speaks with Alex Salmond.
Well, thanks very much.
As viewers will recall, over the last 2 weeks, we've been featuring some of the residents of the Wynford Housing Estate in Maryhill in Glasgow and their ongoing battle with Wheatley Housing Association so they can keep their 600 homes in 4 tower blocks standing. Let's look at what they had to say over the past couple of weeks.
And I'm just very saddened that this is happening in the community that I moved to, and thought I would be happy to live here forever, and I still want to live here, but I'm saddened that they want to take, when they were built in the 60s, that's concrete and metal. They've outlived half of the houses that have been built and had been brought down, so why do this? It just doesn't make sense when we're having a crisis with everything.
Well, the way it feels currently is that we have a situation in Scotland where the Wheatley Group are being allowed to dictate housing policy. They're allowed to make political decisions that are affecting everybody in society. So we have a homelessness crisis, as you know, in Scotland that's worse than it's ever been. We've got more families homeless, more children homeless than there's ever been. So Wheatley being allowed to take decisions like this is actually an attack on working people. It's an attack on families, on women, on everybody in society.
The change in the community would devastate a gym like this, because the people come here feeling relaxed in the environment, in their own environment. and they know the people that are coming. It's not like a stranger going into a strange multiplex.
It's about the trees, and there was a row of trees just cut down.
Yeah, I saw the logs. It was just a few weeks ago. And what did you feel about that?
I felt angry.
Angry. You look a bit angry. What's on the other side of your banner? What does it say?
It's Stop for Your Life because it's a guy cutting down a tree.
Yeah.
And we need the trees for air.
And why do you need trees? What's the great thing about trees?
They breathe in carbon dioxide and breathe out air.
Absolutely right, Kirsty. Listen, I was about twice your age before I knew the importance of that. But they're also very beautiful, aren't they?
Yeah.
And did you ever go climbing up these trees?
No, not those ones.
You're not just saying that because you're on television, are you?
No.
Have you been on television before?
No, I don't think so.
Well, I'll tell you what, Kirsty, something tells me you might well be on television again.
I have a long association and personal connection. My grandfather was stationed there when it was the Mary Hill Barracks. And I very often used to take my students of architecture. I'm a professor of running a Master of Architecture course to Wynford and took them through what I thought was a kind of fortress town, because the gateway into the barracks was kept there. So it was like entering into a walled village. And it made me laugh when I first got involved in this, because I got a lot of abuse from letters in the papers saying, what does an architect know about saving high flats? He's probably never lived in a high flat like this in his life. When in truth, I lived in a flat like that, exactly like the ones in Wynford for the first 19 years of my life. And I loved it. And that put their gas at a peak, Alex, I can tell you that. So I've never had that level of comment ever coming back to me again.
There's a sensitivity about it, which is not to be found in every point block in and around Glasgow.
Professor Dunlop, we've heard that Harold Butto, this legendary planner with the Scottish Special Housing Association, what vision did Butto have in mind when he designed the Wynford?
The pilotis, or the columns that Kate's just talked about, allows the high-rises to float above a carpet of green. And the intention is, for me, it'd be following Corbusian principles. The residential areas lived above the ground plane and allows the ground floor, the grass and the trees and everything for community use and for the residences to almost within a parkland setting. The sad thing about it, as far as the vision of Butto is concerned, is that the trees are all now mature, right? And much of this fantastic landscape that Butto was responsible for creating, he wouldn't have seen. He would just have had the vision looking 60 years in advance to see the lime trees and the chestnut trees and the plane trees in this mature landscape that is in danger as a consequence of this demolition of potentially being destroyed.
And now let's hear what you had to say. Alan says, housing associations are no longer community housing and must be abolished and either brought back under community ownership or council ownership. SN for RFF says, another excellent episode, lots to think about. Jacqueline says, another great show, thanks. I hope the people of Wynford win out. It's all about money. Get rid of these housing associations now. Most politicians on all levels just enjoy their comfy seats. Vote them out. An angry Scottish man says, the flats need retrofitted. They're perfectly good and large enough for an elderly community. Martina says, pure corruption behind these moves of the council. Follow the money. Who stands to win? Magnus says, aye, very good programme. I've been in that area. Lot of deprivation. Maybe that's why the residents wanted out. Well, I think they're wanting to stay in. Kent Lady in Fife says, started watching this a few weeks back. Very good. And then goes on to say, a great episode. Enjoying it very much. Keep up the good work. Well, thank you very much indeed, Kent Lady in Fife. Join us after the break where we return to Alex Salmond and his favourite segment of the show, Hidden Heroes. Welcome back to Scotland Speaks with Alex Salmond and to Alex's favourite part of the show, Hidden Heroes, sponsored by and in association with Flagship Media.
You know, there's a passage in a speech that Hamza Yusuf made in New York a few weeks ago that caused a bit of social media interest. And that was where he said that we should celebrate great figures of the Scottish Enlightenment like Adam Smith, David Hume and Fanny Wright. And what people ask social media is, who's this Fanny Wright? And of course, she wasn't actually a huge figure in the Scottish Enlightenment, but nonetheless, she's somebody who deserves to be remembered, and she's going to be the subject of this week's Hidden Heroes. Frances Wright was born in the Nergate in Dundee in 1795, but she grew up in England. Her views, which evolved radical, dramatic views, probably owed a bit more to French materialism or English utilitarianism or perhaps even socialist utopianism than they did to Scots rationality. But Frances made her name in the United States of America. Because she was well connected and very rich, she came into the friendship of the Marquis de Lafayette. That's right, Lafayette, the hero of the French and American revolutions, then as a fairly elderly gentleman making his final triumphant tour of the United States in 1825. And because of that, and Frances accompanied him on that tour, she fell in with Thomas Jefferson, stayed with him actually, and also met past and present and future American presidents like John Quincy Adams, Madison. She met and liked up-and-coming General Andrew Jackson, to whom she became a great political supporter and adherent. And Frances' views were remarkable, dramatic and hugely radical. She was a radical feminist, she was a trade unionist, she was in favour of emancipation of slaves, but she was also in favour of interracial marriage, which, as you can imagine, caused quite a stir in 19th century America. And for these radical views, she put them into practice. She founded a utopian community in Tennessee, which only lasted a few years, but nonetheless was a brave experiment. She was a publicist. She got disgusted with the corruption of Tammany Hall in the Democratic Party, and she established a new political party, the Working Men's Party in New York City, which gave Tammany a run for its money in the late 1820s. So she did all of these incredible activities, but she came into her own as a lecturer. She was probably the first female public lecturer, probably certainly in American and Western history, and probably just about in world history. And she drew huge audiences to the Fanny Wright lectures. There were associations, societies. The Fanny Wright societies were founded as a result of the dramatic impression that Frances Wright made when she spoke about women's emancipation, slaves' emancipation, women's rights, the right of abortion, of interracial marriage, a totally new utopian society that Fanny Wright put forward in her lectures. She was a publicist, she published newspapers, she had all of these activities sparkling through the body of American politics. She was friends with the rich, the famous, she was an advocate of the working man. She was an extraordinary lady. She died in a relatively quiet retirement in the 1850s in Ohio. And although she had a few setbacks because of her views, she was advocating interracial marriage almost 150 years before Star Trek screenwriters decided to put it on American television screens. So she was a remarkable lady, well in advance of her time. She was subject to being pilloried and attacked vehemently in the press of the day, but she bravely argued on, undaunted for all of her variety of causes, making that substantial impact. So I think she deserves to be not remembered as a great figure of the Scottish Enlightenment, because she wasn't that, but remembered as a remarkable woman who was trailblazing in a whole range of ways and found her meter in the new world, in the new democracy of the United States. And regardless of the criticism to which she was subjected, blasted her way through and was indomitable in her advocacy of the great causes in which she believed. And looking back, not just as the foremost female lecturer of her day and the first public lecturer as a woman who advocated for these causes. She made a substantial impact, and insomuch as we can claim her and the Nethergate and Dundee can claim her, she is a rightful addition to this pantheon of Scotland's hidden heroes.
And now we return to the theme of this week's show, which is the European Free Trade Association, or known in more common parlance to us all as EFTA, as Alex in conversation with the President of the West Nordic Council, followed by an interview with an independent researcher for Commonweal, Craig Berry.
Bryndis, welcome to Scotland Speaks with Alex Salmond.
Thank you, honoured to be here.
Now, as President of the West Council of the Nordic Council, you're in an excellent position to judge as an Icelandic politician what the pros and cons are of membership of the European Free Trade Association, EFTA. What do you think are the pros and cons?
Well, there are a lot of pros for Iceland to be part of EFTA and then the EE agreement. Of course, we are like a small island up in the north. We are only 350 or 400,000. And with this agreement, we have access to over 500 million people. So it is extremely important for our business side and our economy, and that for prosperity of the Icelandic nation. Some political parties would like Iceland to join the European Union. My party and the ruling parties that are together in the government, we do not think that is a good idea. Main reason is, of course, because with this agreement, we have access to the market, but we have still full control of our most important key sectors like fisheries, for example. And then, of course, we conduct our own trade policy. So we do that through EFTA, but we can also do it as an independent. So in my opinion and my party's opinion, it is really important. But of course, Norway is with us in EFTA and EE agreement. And then we have the other Nordic nations being part of the European Union, and they seem like they think that is good for them. So I think in a way that is just a good mixture in the Nordic nation, that we can work together, and some are part of the European Union, others are not.
And is the crucial arrangement then that the EFTA membership is your passport into the European Economic Area, the single market as it's sometimes called, which gives you this access to this massive market as a small island nation?
It is crucial. So I would say, because we have, of course, another trade agreements throughout the EFTA, and they are all important, but I would see the EEA agreement is the most important one for us, because that is the access to this market. But it's, of course, not only access for product and services to the market, it's also about the flowing of people can go between, we can open up, start schools and stuff like that. So this agreement is really important for the whole nation. And I think many young people don't really recognize that it is because of the EE agreement. They have just brought up that it's always like that. But when UK exit the European Union, it got a little turbulence, and then people started discussing what does this really mean. And then it was also very important that we in the EFTA got agreement with the UK government so that people could still stay in UK, the United States or the Scottish people could still be up here. And so the trade is still going on.
You mentioned a few seconds ago that being in EFTA allowed you to retain control of key natural resources like fishing. Would that be the key difference between being an EFTA member, that Iceland is, or being a European Union member and part of the common fisheries policy? Would that be the key difference that's important to Iceland?
I would say for Iceland, being a fishery nation, that is the biggest issue for us. Having full control of our sector in that sense, that is the key factor. But there are also other small things. Even though we are part of the EE agreement and we take up many of the legislation, we do not take it up all. And the agriculture is not inside of it. And then it also gives us the freedom to be independent in forming our own trade policy, because of course the EEA is just a terrific bloc in that sense. So for the independent small nation up in the north there, we think it's important in many aspects. But the fishery industry, of course, is the biggest issue.
And would you, as an Icelandic politician, a member of the Independence Party, one of Iceland's longest standing parties, a mass membership party, part of the government of Iceland just now, but looking at your northern neighbour here in Scotland, would you say to the people of Scotland that as they look at our own future, that we should at least consider EFTA membership as well as European Union membership?
Actually, of course, it's the Scottish people to decide on that. But when we have this big Brexit thing going on, and I visit both in the UK Parliament and up in the Scottish Parliament and was speaking to parliamentarians, I understood the frustration, and I totally understand how complicated this was. And in my opinion, I thought it could be a good idea that you guys would just join EFTA with us. But I heard that there was not very much willingness, probably more up like in Scotland. And I know we have had like really tight and good communication and ties with Scotland. So I think it is something that you should discuss and look into.
It's certainly a matter for the people of Scotland to decide, but I suppose what I'd like to ask, Bryndis, would we be welcome in EFTA? Would you and Norway and Switzerland and Liechtenstein like to have Scotland as a member if there was an application?
So, of course, I couldn't answer you right now, but I think I think we would welcome you. At least welcome the discussion, yes.
Thank you so much, Bryndis, for joining me on Scotland Speaks with Alex Salmond.
Thank you, and good luck.
And now I'm delighted to be joined by Craig Berry, an independent researcher with the think tank Commonweal. Craig Berry, welcome to Scotland Speaks with Alex Salmond.
Thank you.
Now, EFTA, the European Free Trade Association, I mean, what are its origins and history?
It's an intergovernmental organisation. It started in the 1960s. Currently, it includes Iceland, Liechtenstein, Norway and Switzerland. It also included the UK at a time, and also includes Finland for a time, which both went on to become members of the European Union. It started off as a kind of precursor to the European community, and it's managed to continue since then.
Now, many countries have been in EFTA and then went on to join the European Union. But why might the EFTA now be suitable for Scotland, given its membership as exists?
Well, for EFTA, it would be the impact on the Scottish economy would be quite profound, because you would have enhanced trade opportunities within EFTA. When you are starting to build a country, there are certain things that you have to do before you are you're able to kind of move forward within different trade agreements. We will be so early in the stages of an independent Scotland. There will be questions of for let's say the Scottish renewables. There are issues surrounding state aid rules. So if we're at the very early stages of building a new Scotland, the state aid rules would be in conflict with us creating a renewable energy industry that fits Scotland. But when we actually start to move forward and we become members of, let's say, the EU, we would be doing so having built those industries. So if we're members of the EU, we would build the industries that we need. We would then join the EU, and then the state aid rules would be in place. So it's all about building our economy from independence.
So you're saying that EFTA, because of the looser restrictions, might be a suitable place for Scotland to be in the early stages of independence. But what about those who would say, well, EFTA has the advantage of not controlling key resources like fishing, which wouldn't be a short-term advantage, but would be a long-term advantage for Scotland?
Yeah, well, it entirely depends. Luckily, within EFTA, you have the ability to decide what process you want to go. So if for joining EFTA, that's a process that could take weeks to months. When you're in EFTA, if you have a group of people that believe that perhaps Scotland would be better served being in the single market of the EU, then the EE agreement, that's something we could join the European Economic Area, that has a streamlined process for EFTA states. So if we want to join the single market of the EU, we can do that. If we want to join the EU, former members took as little as 23 months to enter. So it entirely depends on what Scotland wants to do at the time. We will have to shape what Scotland is, and then we'll have to decide what is the best step for us. So we can remain within EFTA. That's probably the option I would prefer, but there are other options there, and our ability to move forward is enhanced when we're in EFTA.
So let's look at two questions. What would be the attractions of having Scotland as a member from the point of view of the existing EFTA countries, Norway, Iceland, Switzerland and Liechtenstein? What would Scotland have to offer EFTA?
Well, we would have enhanced trade opportunities. So Scotland's membership in EFTA could facilitate the expansion of its export base. It allows the diversification of trade products and services, which could contribute to greater economic stability and resilience. So that's really, really important. In terms of diversifying trade partnerships and markets, reducing a reliance on any single market and minimising the impact of external shocks on its overall economic stability. So we're trying to break away from the London-centric economic model, and this gives us the tools to enact economic buffers from let's say, whatever decisions the UK economy decides to go in the future.
Now, we look back to the process of Brexit, and in the immediate aftermath of Brexit, a number of particularly Norwegian politicians made it pretty clear that they didn't want to see the United Kingdom as a member of EFTA, that they would see difficulties in that. Why would they see difficulties for the United Kingdom, but apparently no difficulties for Scotland?
It's to do with the balance of power. The UK would be such a massive economy within EFTA that they would have a greater they would have greater influence on EFTA trade policies. But whereas Scotland is small and similar to Norway and Iceland, the terms of our geography, the resources we have available, our population, we are a country that's similar to other EFTA countries. So they would see that this would be a greater partnership for us, for them, and it's not necessarily something that they would see with the broader UK.
So, Craigberry, Scotland and EFTA, would it be a marriage made in heaven?
Yeah, I mean, the opportunities we have for our trade, the opportunities we have to shift from the UK London-centric economic model, we are shaping a Scottish economy, and EFTA is something that would be more in line with what Scottish citizens believe that Scotland should look like. So it's, I think it's a good opportunity for Scotland.
Craigberry, thank you so much for joining me on Scotland Speaks with Alex Salmond. Scotland and EFTA, the European Free Trade Association, has quite a ring to it. You know, in some ways, as we heard from an academic point of view of Craig Berry, or from an Icelandic point of view from Bryndis Haraldsdóttir, there is a compatibility of interests. You know, the EFTA is composed of small countries. A number of these countries, Iceland, Norway, have economic interests similar to those of Scotland. Switzerland, of course, has a huge finance industry. Well, so does Scotland, at least still has it as yet. So there's many compatibilities in terms of size and in terms of the range of economic interests. And therefore it's understandable that people should feel attracted from that point of view. There's also issues in terms of the development of the European Union and people's fears that it has assumed greater powers and is intending to assume even greater powers, and the old jibe of why would you exchange sovereignty given to London for sovereignty given to Brussels. Again, EFTA has certain advantages over that. But you know, for me, the most interesting thing in this examination of the European Free Trade Association is what was said by Jim Sillars in terms of negotiations. Now, let's imagine that the Scottish politicians, like myself, who believe in Scottish independence, are successful in advancing that cause to near our objective. And let's imagine, as I used to spend a lot of time thinking about back in 2012, 13, 14, that you're actually in serious negotiations with the UK Prime Minister. Let's say Hamza Yousaf, as the Scottish First Minister, defying all current expectations, is in that position with Sir Keir Starmer as a UK Prime Minister, and they're negotiating the terms of Scottish independence. And at some point in that discussion, Keir Starmer will probably say to Hamza Yousaf or his equivalent, what's your trading policy going to be? And in answer to that question during these negotiations, it would not be a sufficiency to say, well, in a few years' time, we believe we've got a very good chance of joining the European Union. That just wouldn't cut it, because even Keir Starmer would look at Hamza Yousaf and say, yeah, but what's your trade policy going to be next month or next year? And in the reality of negotiation, unless Scotland can point to a definite way forward, it would be at a crippling disadvantage and totally dependent on the goodwill of the UK Prime Minister, which means that whatever bargains were to be driven would be bad bargains for Scotland. If, on the other hand, the Scottish First Minister could look the UK Prime Minister in the eye and say, well, actually, we've already got agreement to join EFTA, we're inheriting all their current 30 trade agreements with the rest of the world, and of course the UK, and we've got an early passport into the European Economic Area, then you have the certainty of a reply which changes the balance of power in these negotiations. You know, understandably, people who see the disaster of Brexit, who think it's such an outrage that Scotland should have been dragged away from the European Union against the will of the Scottish people, who have seen the success of the SNP arguing for Scotland in Europe over the last 30 years, are thrilled to the idea of the European Union. But the real politique of this is in negotiations. Unless you had a binding commitment from the Commission and the Member States, you would get accelerated membership within a defined period of time, which you will not get. Then, of course, in negotiations, that aspiration for European Union membership would be of no avail to a Scottish First Minister trying to negotiate with a UK government. I think there's a good case for EFTA in trading terms. I think there's a good case for EFTA in terms of international cooperation and the compatibility and the attractiveness of the countries of Iceland, Norway, Liechtenstein and Switzerland. Of course, there's an excellent case for it. There's an excellent case in the clear warmth of the welcome that Scotland would get into that association of countries. But the overwhelming case for Scotland as it is the case of realpolitik. It's to look at that time when we're approaching our objective. And when the hard questions are asked, actually EFTA would be a hard answer and a successful answer to one of the most important. That's why something tells me that Scotland and EFTA, Scotland and the European Free Trade Association, is not an issue for one programme in this series, but is an issue in which we'll return to time and time again. And now with that, I return you to Tasmina, who's got a few words to say to close up the show.
And with that, we come to the end of this week's show. We hope you very much enjoyed its content on EFTA. And as Alex has already said, we intend to return to this topic very soon indeed. Now, next week, we'll be broadcasting actually from the Alba Party Conference, so you can look forward to that. In the meantime, please remember to subscribe to the channel for lots of extra content, including Ask Alex Anything, which is an awful lot of fun, and also to remember to watch us every Thursday at 9 o'clock on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and every social media platform, as Alex says, you can possibly imagine. Until then, we hope to see you next week.
This is an exciting time in Scotland's story, and understanding our past will help us determine our future. And when Scotland's voice is heard, it charts the way forward. This is Scotland Speaks with Alex Salmond.